Welcome to the Corporate Venturing Insider Series, where I interview top practitioners in the CVC world and learn with you the best practices and golden nuggets that they have accumulated over their career. In this episode, we will be learning from Ellen Ehrenpreis, partner at Orrick. Ellen, could you take a few minutes to share your story and how you got to where you are today?
Well, thank you for having me. This is a great opportunity. I really appreciate the invitation. My journey to working with investors started almost 30 years ago when I graduated from law school. By the time I graduated from law school in the early 90s, I think my closest connection to technology was the Mac SE computer, which was my very first computer that I got during law school. With a dot matrix printer, and that really was the extent of my exposure to technology. I graduated from law school fully intentioned to practice in New York, where I grew up, and thought I would have a career. But in the early part of the mid-90s, I kept getting calls from some law school friends of mine who were actually out in Silicon Valley, as well as some business school classmates of mine who, bucking the trend at Wharton, which was mostly to go to New York and join an investment bank, had gone to Silicon Valley and were doing really interesting things in technology. I have to say, I wasn't the trailblazer that he was. I was still the risk-averse East Coast New Yorker. So instead of joining Venture Law Group, which was a startup itself, I joined the behemoth technology law firm, which seemed like the right place to go in my first moments in Silicon Valley. But I landed in Silicon Valley, and that really began what has now been a 25-year career here in Silicon Valley, working with technology companies almost exclusively. So in the early days of my career in Silicon Valley, I worked with, which was similar to my early days on the East Coast, practicing with lots of large companies in semiconductor and security, enterprise, all sorts of technology, and ultimately co-founded a law firm actually with one of my partners in the venture-backed space, focused exclusively in representing companies on the corporate side in the venture space. And then I folded that practice into Orrick when I joined back in 2018. We work a lot, and I work a lot with my clients on corporate governance issues. What are the key issues, and how do you think about the right structure for the board and different issues that relate to corporate governance? A lot of focus on, obviously, due diligence in the financing process, which is a big focus as you go through a financing event. And obviously negotiation of the financing documents. That's a key part of what we do with our investor clients, represent them in connection with investments, helping them both understand the financing documents, understand how the terms interplay and where the trade-offs are, what the risks are. But overall, I would say my clients really come to me to be an advisor. My role really is to help my clients weigh and assess the legal risks and the benefits of the deals that they're contemplating.
This is really a good introduction. I can definitively comment about the dependable hands-on advisor. You've definitively been very responsive, and what I appreciate the most is that you're not just giving me the advice and letting me decide. So I want to ask a few questions about Orrick, and then we'll go generic about corporate VC, corporate venturing. Orrick has a few things that are quite special when we look at the website, so it's public domain. One is your startup toolkit online, which is towards the startups. Do you have an explanation about why you started this and what's the engagements behind it?
Yeah, I'm going to actually answer that question by backing up a step and provide a little bit of context for that. Orrick has been a leader in innovation in the legal landscape for many years. Orrick has been named the most innovative law firm in America for 3 of those 4 years. And in the 4th year, which was last year, we were named the first runner-up. And my theory is just we couldn't be named again a 4th time. They had to put someone else in the top spot. But our chief innovation officer has been named the most innovative lawyer in America. There are many things that Orrick does that stand out and have been well recognized in the legal industry and in the press more broadly, to contribute in different ways, both to the legal ecosystem, but also to the ecosystems of our clients.
Very nice. So my last question about Orrick. You also have Orrick Labs Incubator. Can you just describe what it is and if it is part of the DNA of Orrick?
It is absolutely, as I think probably the context I just provided really drives home the point that it is absolutely part of the DNA of Orrick. Our Orrick Labs is an internal incubator where we are working on technology that we can deploy in our practice. Our focus on innovation is at many levels. It's not just how do we create new legal tech, which is the focus of Orrick Labs, but also how do we innovate the way we think about the industries and ecosystems in which we operate and advise. And just to give an example of a really amazing piece of innovation that came out of Orrick Labs is a product called our Orrick Dashboard, which we use in our tech companies practice. It is the first of its kind in the legal landscape of providing a really functional, robust workspace where when we have a company client, but also our investor clients, can have a repository of all of the most important documents on the company side for the company. We actually just spun that out. That is now a standalone company that's itself getting venture funded.
Very nice. So let me go back to one thing you said during your introduction, which I think probably is very useful for many people to have your tech. You mentioned about professional and personal colliding. And the word is probably subconscious, but there's a crash concept in colliding. So could you give maybe a few tips for people who are listening today about how to manage really well when you indeed have an overlap between professional and personal?
That's really a really interesting question. When I first came out to Silicon Valley, some of the partners who had recruited me to come out and to make the trip west were determined once I got here that I would stay and not go back to my roots on the East Coast. And in those days, it was a little different, obviously, than the world is today. I think they thought that if I had a personal connection, there would be a greater likelihood I would stay. So my advice there is view everything as an opportunity, but be authentic. I never view a relationship in the moment as worthwhile just because it may bear fruit in my professional career. I think it's just a natural organic product of developing really good, great relationships that people trust you, they learn what you're capable of, and ultimately it will pay off in your professional career.
I love your answer. Now let's move to corporate venturing. If I look at TDK, they had done 10 minority investments in the previous 3 years before we started talking about a corporate VC. So clearly you don't need a corporate VC to do this kind of open innovations and investments and in startups and so on. What's your view of when does it make sense to do a corporate VC and maybe when it doesn't make sense to do a corporate VC?
That's a really good question. I personally think it makes sense for many companies. Whether the company is ready is a different question. There has to be a long-term strategic vision that marries with a desire to actually participate in this landscape. Are there financial goals? Are there strategic goals? Are there commercial goals? Are there information goals? Are there technology development goals? Does the company want to test the waters in a particular market that it may not have be playing in today? There are lots of reasons why it may make sense. And I think having a mindset of wanting to be committed and explore those is really the first step.
I totally resonate with both commitment and long-term vision. And when I started looking at corporate VCs, I was told a sentence, which is, you only become a corporate VC when you survived a CEO change. So can you share maybe your view about how important it is to fit the long-term vision of the company and yet find a way to be to survive this kind of changes that could happen?
In today's world, I think there's more recognition than there ever has been about the importance of the long-term strategic vision and taking advantage of all the innovation that's happening. Corporations can be slow, they can be somewhat risk averse. It's injecting that sort of innovative spirit, I think, is what helps drive a lot of success among larger companies and the ability to really develop technologies that are addressing real pain points in the market. Today, having a corporate investor is often very validating to the investment thesis and the prospects of the company, because there's so much the corporate can offer in the way of access, customers, technology, R&D, commercial capabilities.
What are some of the baby steps that a corporate can take to begin investing? What are these baby steps you were alluding to?
I think there has to be deliberation. Without much structure, without advanced deliberation, without goals, clear plan, how does any particular investment fit into a thesis? I think the corporation has to do a lot of deliberate planning around what are its goals. Once you know that and you have an idea of what you're trying to achieve, you have to then have the capability to evaluate what's in the marketplace that makes sense as a possible investment target. Do corporates sometimes take chances and invest in companies? They do. I think the better approach is, and we see a lot of corporates actually doing internal incubation, internal acceleration, incubating from within. There's the incubating and innovating from within, and there's also investing in companies that are external to the organization. Some companies do it, they start internally. But again, even from within, I think it's really important that those efforts be tied to a really deliberate strategic planning process.
Very nice. And let's assume that now they've taken these baby steps and they are ready to plunge and start a corporate VC. There are many ways to set up a corporate VCs, on and off balance sheet and separate companies. Can you walk us through what are the very high level trade-offs between the various ways of starting a corporate VC once you've decided to do it?
What you just said is entirely true. It's done different ways. When TDK decided to have a separate investing entity, which we were really thrilled to work with you to set up, as a legal construct, the separate corporate entity is a standalone. So it's insular in the sense that it protects the bigger balance sheet of the mothership because it's got its own corporate legal existence. There's a corporate veil between the venture corporate VC and the mothership. So it has some legal protections and reasons why it makes sense. But I also think it shows a real level of commitment that the corporate has gone ahead and actually set up a separate entity. In the big picture, we're still in many ways in the early days of CVC investing. I think we're seeing a really different level of commitment, both in terms of dollars, but staying power from CVCs after the 2008 crash. There was a tremendous retraction in corporate investing. So far, at least in this recession, I looked at the most recent pitch book stats, and they're really optimistic in terms of the staying power of CVCs today versus the global financial crisis of 2008. So I think that makes a big difference. And if there's a conviction around staying the course, we may see more standalone CVCs.
I agree with you. We are very early days. Global Corporate Venturing issued some statistics showing that in the last 12 months, there was about 700 first-time corporate investors. Clearly, we're just getting started. It's very early days. You were asking about TDK. If I was to really simplify the reason, it's really the wish for TDK, our CEO, our top management, to give a very strong signal to the entrepreneurs who are going to be there for the very long term. And that's why we had a separate fund, separate company. It's actually to the point where the money was in the bank account. It's not like I need to make capital calls. The money was already there. And part of it was a signal about the long term, which it's not just the entrepreneurs in a way, it's also the co-investors to know that we will follow the investment. We have the money to follow despite any downturn. And I remember we had this discussion, Ellen, where we made our fourth investment during COVID-19. And to me, that was a proof point. Until the point we could make an investment during COVID-19, I could not say we were really a corporate VC. But once we started it, and now we're at 11 deals, we have the proof point. So I think that was the why.
I think the point you made just now is really important. I think the message that it signals to the companies and to other investors that you're in it, that you're going to participate and follow on. You're not going to, in a moment of need in that company that made an early investment in, that you're going to be there to help that company see through maybe a potential tough time like COVID-19.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we go too wide, what do you see as the mistakes along the follow investments?
I think some, especially newer CVCs, they don't really think about what does it look like after we make that initial investment. And you have to remind them that it's not just about making that first investment. It's about making that first investment and being committed to stay the course with that company that you've invested in. At some point, it may make sense to not put additional funds in, but you shouldn't make the investment with the mindset that's the only investment you're going to make in that company. Pacing investments and thinking through the follow-on strategy is really important. And I've seen lots of corporate venture clients not really think through their investment pace and their allocation and the size of rounds they're going to participate in, because they haven't fully thought about what funds will be available for follow-on rounds. So I think the first thing is really thinking about that up front, having your arms around how much are you investing in first round investments and what's going to be available for those follow-on rounds.
Maybe you can talk about the reputational cost of not following, because when I was learning about corporate VC, I was told this is the reason why they don't get new deals is when they don't follow what they still believe in the company. So can you talk about the reputational cost? Because that's something that probably many corporates don't understand about the VC world, especially with financial VCs being some of the partners.
The venture community, it's big, but it's small. Everybody knows everybody. And that's true in corporate VC, it's true in the VC community generally. Whereas corporate venture might have been a little bit more insular, there's so much corporate investing into US financial investor-led rounds today. There's corporates in more than half of the deals that have taken place so far in 2020. So that nexus is really tightly woven today. And your reputation is everything. Who you are as an investor, and that's true not just about whether you're going to be there in a follow-on round, but how easy are you to work with? Are you participating at a level of contribution that is what you promised? Did you bring value as the strategic investor to that company?
Maybe some of it is because corporate VCs did not have a good reputation in the past, and therefore you just need to make one mistake and you don't get the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, just as an example of that, it was actually representing a financial investor in a round where they were leading, and a corporate investor who wanted to be part of the syndicate was making all kinds of demands, terms that it wanted really bespoke for itself that would provide great advantages potentially to that corporate investor. And that really didn't sit well with the lead investors, and quite frankly, didn't sit well with the company. And you could see almost palpably the reputation of that corporate decline just weeks around that conversation. And I guarantee that the next time that corporate investor faces a deal with one of the financial investors who were participating and privy to that negotiation, they won't forget that.
And that's the value of the pushback. And maybe that's a good segue for something that is so important, which is the side letters, and how to make sure the side letters are not asking too much, but ask what really matters. But can you talk about side letters in a way that's palpable for the audience?
At the highest level, a side letter can address anything. The question is, what do you want to ask for, and what makes sense strategically, and what do you really need? And maybe it's that you're a corporate investor and you're not getting a board observer seat in the financing docs, but part of, or a critical part maybe even, of the reason for the corporate's investment in that company is to have a window of insight into information gathering or market. And so without having a nexus that allows the corporate investor to achieve those objectives and bring back knowledge, there's not a lot of strategic value in the investment. That's something that, if it's really strategically important, might be a really appropriate side letter provision.
We are getting to the top of the hour, so maybe one more question which could be useful is, what would be your best tip for a new client in terms of engaging with a new legal firm? What is the best way to actually get the relationship as good as possible right from the start?
You know, I said it before, I'll say it again, communication is paramount. It's all about having that open channel of communication so that I, or the legal practitioner, understands what are the needs that need to be met, having a conversation about how to achieve those needs in the most efficient, cost-effective manner. At Orrick, in our tech companies practice, this is what we do. It's the bread and butter of our practice. When a client asks for a timeline or a response on a time frame that is just absolutely impossible. Being honest about that rather than say you can do it and then not deliver it. I never believe in agreeing to something that I can't deliver on. I will strive to meet, and my teams will strive to meet any deadline that we can that's realistic and within the realm of possibility. But having that rapport so that the expectations are set up front, I think is the critical piece.
And I think it's a great tip to finish the interview. Thank you, Ellen. I think there was gold nuggets everywhere during the interview. So thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure always. I'll say this to the entire public audience, but you're one of my favorite clients, and CDK is a favorite client of all of us at Orrick. And the reason is because you guys are just great people, great to work with, and because we have a great and always open line of communication. So it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.